So here's my question. You now know the difference between raster and vector. Take a look here. If you were trying to hide something, which carrier file would you use? Vector or raster? And why? Now, I personally would use raster image, and here's why. Because it usually has a lot more data in it. It's a larger file, and it's acceptable for it to be a larger file. Even if there was space inside of the vector graphics for me to shove in my super secret data for my steganography, the file itself, since it's a bunch of equations, is going to be much denser because it's equations, and it's not going to have places for me to shove my data. I can take an 8 megapixel picture of my cat, and in that I can strip away some of those least significant bits and then insert lots and lots of data. If I do the same thing with a vector image, it's probably going to be a lot smaller container for my file that I'm trying to communicate to you. We need to take the next step here and talk a little bit about compression. Now, in any kind of file that you're transmitting from me to you, the larger the file is, the longer it takes to get there. So what we say is, you know what, let's not transmit all of those blank characters. Let's not transmit all of that amount of green that you see on the screen or blue that you see on the screen. Let's not transmit that. Let's say if there's 7,000 blue dots all in a row, what we'll say is 1 blue dot times 7,000. If we have all white in a row, 500 times 1 white blue dot. And now what we've done is we've taken out all that empty space in there, and we've pressed it down into the information that is critical to us. We transmit it across, and you have the decompression algorithm on your side, and it says, oh, 7,000 of a blue dot, I'll put 7,000 blue dots up there, and however many white dots, and so on throughout the entire picture. So we create these algorithms to remove the repetition. That's what compression does for us. Now here's the thing. In steganography, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, there's lots of repetition in here. We're going to utilize that repetition for something else. It's taking out the ability to compress because we're using that data and it is different at the pixel level, if you will. When we deal with file compression, remember it's that same sentence in the word, that same amount of color in the the same amount of color in the picture. And file compression removes all that repetition in there. The two types of data compression are lossless or lossy. In lossless, we have no loss whatsoever. In lossy, we've actually reduced the quality of the file to transmit it. That's when you hear a lot of people who will take a really high quality recording and actually compress it down. I've seen this a lot with a lot of MP3s where they actually compress them down so they really don't sound nearly as good as the originals. That's a lossy format. So when we go from MP3 and we make another copy and we compress and compress and compress with MP3, eventually a copy of a copy of a copy with a lossy compression format will end up corroding the document to a point where it's not as valuable, it's not as clean and neat. Now, let's talk about this from a forensics investigator standpoint. You've got a hard drive image in front of you, not a picture of a hard drive, but literally all of the data files from a particular hard drive in the operating system. And somebody has gone along and deleted components out of that or deleted files out of that. The original files that you were looking for were pictures inside of there. And somebody stomped on a particular piece of that picture. You want to retrieve that picture. How would you do it? What we would do is we would do salvaging or carving. And we would look for the key characteristics of either header information or footer information to allow us to recreate that particular image. Let's pretend that somebody didn't want us to know that it was an image and they actually changed the extension on the end. Instead of an MP3, they turned it into a .txt file. We can't hide, and you're going to see how that works in just a second. So the header gives the image file instructions about how it should be displayed on the screen, not the extension. The extension is the application that's being used. The file header information tells it how to display it. When we carve, what we do is we look at pieces of a file, or we look for a sequence. Usually if we're doing file carving on image files, pictures, what we're looking for is a series of coded bits that talk to us about color. Sometimes we're looking for those functions for vector graphics that are key indicators of the actual extension of a color over a period of time. And polygons, we're looking for those kinds of signatures. So we have file carving utilities that say, look for this repetition in image formats and bring that to us. Even if we don't have the header, we can still see that repetition inside of the file itself. What we want to do is we want to analyze the file headers. And remember that the investigators have to analyze all the image file headers with normal forensics tools. They may not recognize the extensions, or the extensions may not be there, so they have to go deeper into it. And they look at the hexadecimal values presented in the header to define that particular file type, because somebody changed the extension on it and you don't know how it was supposed to be read. So you take this hexadecimal editor, you put it in place, and you view that file header, and you compare that file header to a known database of all file headers. Let's look at one particular image header value. And this is for the JPEG. The JPEG image file format has a hexadecimal value of FFD8FFE00010. That is the hexadecimal representation of the header. And let's look at the information in there. The first 2 bytes, FFD8, will identify the start of the image file. The FFE0 is application dependent. Use Photoshop. Use this kind of editor. This is what was used last time on this particular file. And then we skip 2 bytes, and then we have 4A, 46, 49, 46 in the 7th through 10th byte. If we convert that into ASCII, it says JFIF, and that tells you for sure that this is a JPEG, even if the extension was wrong. So we dig down inside the header values. Now, if somebody were to change the header values, it would be very difficult for us. We'd have to go further into the file in the file carving execution, and we'd have to look for the patterns of bits and colors and those descriptions there, and we could be off in a lot of cases. So remember, we have to look at these analyzed file headers. We have to analyze these based on a complete header value, and then we look at that header value inside of a hex editor, and it will actually tell us what's going on. You can repair damaged file headers, but I will tell you, as a forensics investigator, we really don't have time for this because we're flowing so many files out there, we're doing so many cases, if we're truly making any money at this. Unless this is a really super sensitive issue, then we might start digging down into these damaged file headers. And we have special applications that actually help us with this. Remember, when we're carving data, we're identifying the data to be carved. That could be across an entire image file, and then retrieving fragments of that picture file, if you will. We can reconstruct those fragments using disk editing tools. We can also look at the file allocation table to identify corrupt clusters, and we can see that it's marked as corrupt, and therefore, oh, well, skip over that particular piece. And now we need to return back to the fact that we have adversarial communication, and we're trying to communicate. You and I are trying to communicate in the presence of these people, and we don't want them to know that we're planning the revolution at this point. They want to know. They have the ability to view our files as well because we posted them up there. What they can do is they can see, hey, that student and that instructor, they both like cats. Now, I know when I talk to Dean and I've interviewed him, he actually hates cats. So why is he posting to this site? I also noticed that that student there, well, they don't have any cats either, and they're going to that site quite often and they're posting comments about those particular pictures only about Dean's files. Something's fishy about these files. So what they'll do is they'll turn over Steganalysis and they'll use that. They will do analysis of our files to see if they can see those hidden patterns within the file. This is the reverse process of steganography. We're looking for those distortions, those inappropriate distortions that generate a pattern on their own. Now, here's the problem. If we used steganography with no cryptography, they could find the pattern, they could use the different tools like StegDetect, and they could figure out exactly what we said. The problem is that we're encrypting our message and then we're shoving it inside of a particular carrier file. So now if we're using a sufficient encryption algorithm, so now it's total noise across there. Now they know that we've been using steganography because they see examples of it, but the reality is they don't know what we said because they don't know what the key is. Remember, Steganalysis used to detect the hidden data inside of there. We could set that aside for just a moment and look at the type of activity of these two people and how they communicate with each other. We could go to their workstations, get a search and seizure warrant, and they could come to me and they could say, we want to look on your machine. And if they see that I have these steganography tools on my machine, and I also have wiping software on my machine, and I'm using large carrier files, repetitive carrier files on my machine, that would probably give them an indication that I'm using steganography. It's those three things that give you the clue about steganography. The steganography tool, the sufficiently large carrier files, and the wiping programs. It also could be the activity of the forums that I participate in. Steganalysis detection is done with a variety of tools. I've just given a couple of them here, like StegDetect and StegBreak. You could also listen for visible noise. Or look for visible noise. It's highly unlikely in the file that you're going to actually see that because most steganography tools say your file that you're trying to put inside of this carrier is too large, get a bigger file. They actually do that kind of detection. There are all sorts of Steganalysis methods out there. Just know that these exist. I don't think you need to know the definitions of them, but this would be if you're attacking steganography. Finally, here's some really great Steganalysis tools. I like Hex Workshop, but it makes you put in a lot of work. I think S-Tools and StegDetect are probably the older, more reliable tools at this point. If you find better Steganalysis tools out there, I really would like to hear from you about that for steganography. Remember, final summary here, steganography for us, we're looking at intellectual property theft, data loss prevention, where we may have to look at internal adversaries. And when we talk about image files, we're doing that for file carving to actually get data that has not been encrypted or that does not have any kind of hidden meaning inside of it. It's just the images that we're choosing. So we'll do file carving, and we'll actually look at the the header of that particular file to detect what kind of file we're supposed to be looking at, even if they change the extension. So that's steganography for forensics investigations.